All right, everybody, here's a quick look at the Renaissance. We're going to try and go through this pretty quick. A lot of it's pictures. You're going to have to listen to the descriptions here and try and get it down. So we have the end of the Middle Ages. And by the end of the Middle Ages, we have a couple big changes that are going to take place as the result of the Crusades. Number one, you may find it a little thing, we have the creation of horsepower. And horses are creating what is known as pulling the mold-board plow, which is very similar to the plow modern day farmers use. I know you city slickers need to get out and see what a plow looks like. But it is shaped like a teardrop. The front edge is very narrow, and as it flares back, it scoops over or rounds its shape, so when the plow digs up the earth, it folds over the previous year's crop to be used as fertilizer. This allows farmers to plant their crops deeper, so they are less susceptible to frost, to too much sun, to too much rain, and safe from like birds and squirrels. So there is an increase in the food supply. And this is going to be important as Europe deals with the nastiness of the Black Plague. Also is a simple thing known as crop rotation, or the three-field system. What we're going to do is in field number one, we're going to plant beans. In field number two, we're going to plant wheat. And in field number three, we are going to leave it alone. It's called fallow. We may graze our horses and our cows there for manure to be fertilizer and allow the land to replenish itself. In the second year, field number one will be left fallow. Field number two will be planted with beans, and field number three will be planted with wheat. So we are going to rotate the crops as they fertilize and draw different nutrients out of the soil. Big change. Second big change comes with, as we know, the creation of towns and townships, where the European banking system is created, where there are different branches of banks. Think of like Bank of America, SunTrust Bank, where there are different branches in different cities. And people can take out a loan. Well, they will lend you money, but you pay interest. So if you borrow $100 at 10% interest, you have to pay back $110. Also, there is the idea of setting up credit. We will allow you to purchase the product now, and then when you sell it, you are going to pay us later, like the modern day using of a credit card. And so city life is going to begin to grow. And with all of this, there is a revival of trade coming back from, the Hebrew, the Byzantine, and the Islamic scholars, and Greek and Roman writers, and the Greco-Roman world comes as reinfused into the European population, and universities begin to pop up. And instead of writing in Latin all the time, there is writing in vernacular, or the everyday language of the people. Kind of like, down here in North Carolina, you have the t-shirts that say, "Welcome to North Carolina, ya all," Y''ALL. It's the language of the people. So this is going to encourage more people than ever before to read. And Dante Alighieri is going to use this to write his Inferno, his modern conception of hell, and he's going to write it on purposely in vernacular to make the learned aristocrats learn what was known as the peasant language, or modern day Italian. Prego, grazie. All right, and so here we have the Renaissance. All right, and the starting point is going to be here in Italy with this beautiful church known as the Duomo. Between 13 and 1600, we're going to have the Renaissance here in Western Europe. And the name simply means rebirth, where we have this brand new interest in the classical learning and the liberal arts curriculum, started way back in ancient Athens. And this is a time of creativity and change. It's very exciting. As the politics, the culture, and the social and the economics are going to change just widely. And it's going to be a tough time full of intrigue and backbiting and just corruption, along with the creativity and modernness that is brought in. And what we're going to have is a renewed emphasis on human achievement, what the individual single person can accomplish. And so nowadays when you hear the term Renaissance man, this is a guy who's good at everything, at, working on cars, to doing carpentry, to laying concrete, to having a professional job, being a doctor or a lawyer or even a peasant teacher like me. They're good at everything, playing music, painting, singing, and going out and running a chainsaw and hunting. So it implies what a person can do with his or her talents. So this is going to start in Italy in the 1300s, and slowly it's going to spread northward, reaching its peak around the mid-1550s. And so we've got this renewed interest in classical learning developed back in ancient Greece and Rome, and it makes perfect sense that Italy is the starting point, since it was the home of the old Roman Empire. And so a lot of Italy's cities were able to survive the Middle Ages because of their distance from the invading German barbarians. Cities like Venice and Florence had become large centers of manufacturing and trade, and there are wealthy, powerful merchants begin to emerge as leaders as a result of the Crusades. And among this comes the emphasis of education and learning. And so these new merchants are going to seize economic and political leadership roles in their cities. And so we are going to start looking at these things, the dome. And the dome is going to be a thing that will be built upon the Duomo. All right? And you have the conical shaped Duomo here that you can see. Come on back. You can see here on the Capitol building. And there's the dome of the ancient Parthenon. And a lot of this comes as a result of Renaissance architecture by a guy known as Filippo Brunelleschi. And he leads the way as he breaks away from this large Gothic Middle Ages building style, and he returned to more of the classical Roman style. And he will adopt the Roman arch. If you ever get to Florence, go inside the Duomo, where he lays bricks in different patterns, kind of like a zigzag, if you can see the 90-degree angle here, to reinforce. There's like actually 7 domes inside this one to support its massive weight. And he does this in 1446. And as a result, the Duomo becomes the model for others. When Michelangelo will build the St. Peter's Basilica, there's Filippo's name there, sorry if you can't quite see it, will build the St. Peter's in Rome, and even the modern United States Capitol building. And so here's the city of Florence, right smack dab in the middle there is the Duomo. And Florence is going to be run by a powerful banking merchant family known as the Medicis. And the Medicis are going to be extremely important in this day and age. Here we have the different Italian city-states, dominated, as I said, by all those merchants who were coming through. Nobles are slowly weakening, running into a secondary role. And so the city of Florence is run by a so-called Republican government, where people are going to vote who their elected leadership is. And the Medici family in Florence are going to rise to prominence. They become a family of bankers. And the Florence will be the city that will visibly symbolize what the Renaissance actually is: beauty and learning. And with their wealth and their influence, the Medici family will become the unofficial rulers of Florence for years. While it is Republican, the Medicis kind of dominate like dictators. Some of their family members will even become popes, and it will help lead to the corruption. So the most famous leader is this guy here on the left, Lorenzo Medici. He is going to symbolize what this is, and he will help build the beautiful city of Florence. There's a Netflix show about him on right now, shows you the twists and turns of what it takes to be this powerful family. And so the Renaissance here with the School of Athens, we're going to talk about it a couple times. Scholars are going to look to the ancient Greeks and Romans for their inspiration. And a lot of this comes at the result of a guy named Francisco Petrarch, Petrarch, like pet and then arch, Petrarch, throw another R in there, like the Roman arch. And he was a citizen of Florence during the Medici's reign, and he comes up or gives rise to the renewed idea of humanism, study of classical culture, the humanities, what we do, study of history and language, like English class, writing, art, beauty, culture, the ancient Athenian liberal arts curriculum. And he felt that people needed to broaden their educational background, and that this would heighten and stimulate someone's creativity. So he builds a library, and he tried to include a copy of every single manuscript from the Greco-Roman period he could get his hands on. Thought, philosophy, religion, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, you name it. And this is what he wants to do, all right? And a part of it comes with the idea of pleasure. You don't have to be serious all the time. You could enjoy yourself a little bit without ever offending God, all right? Just because you're having a good time, you're enjoying a laugh or a good time with friends, doesn't mean you are sinning. The seriousness of the Middle Ages when things were at their all-time lowest. So this will give birth to what we know as the Ninja Turtle artists. The famous cartoon characters are named after four of the famous sculptors, paintists, and inventors and writers during the Renaissance era. First up, we have Donatello. And Donatello, and keep in mind, these guys are all going to live like right around the same time as each other. So how amazing would it be to be in a city when these four giants of the Renaissance are interacting? Donatello will be famous for creating the first life-size sculptures since the Roman Empire, more realistic art. And so here's a statue that to himself right here, and it's very similar to one he makes of the great Saint George, the warrior saint. And he will use bronze and marble to make these life-size replicas, trying to capture the thought and what the person was actually doing at the time, making them as realistic as possible. And one of the things that's going to get him in trouble is the first sculpture of the David here, holding a giant sword after conquering Goliath, the big enemy. And this causes a lot of problems. Number one, it was commissioned by the Medicis, and people thought it was sacrilegious after this very serious time in the Middle Ages. It causes problems for a couple reasons. Number one, David is naked. And number two, he looks kind of girly there, kind of effeminate, long hair and this and that. And Donatello said, no, it's my interpretation. Remember, David was a young boy. He wasn't some husky, buff, muscled, soldier. He was a young boy who was brave. And this will begin to symbolize the Medici reign and the Renaissance. And there are several replicas of it to this day. And he will also help to bring in a new painting style that is also going to become big. They're still keeping up with the idea of religion. Here is Saint George, all right, fighting this dragon, saving this poor maiden. And in the background, you can kind of see these mountains and the clouds, and it's made to kind of give the painting depth. While it's a flat painting, it looks deeper. And St. George is going to roll back the clouds of darkness and shove the devil back into the depths of hell. So this is there's still that religious connotation, but we're making it more real and humanistic. And so one of his more famous bronze sculptures is Herod's Feast, where at the end in this bronze relief you see the head of John the Baptist that Herod said, bring me the head of John the Baptist here and now on a plate, and that sits right next door. But you can see the table, and guys look like they're talking, and people are going through the windows, giving everything this lifelike depth. Next is my favorite, Michelangelo, very troubled guy, had some bouts with depression. Never thought that he was a good artist when he makes some of the world's most creative things. He's known for sculpting, painting, architecture, and poetry. And Donatello will hang around from 1386 to 1466. And then we got Michelangelo, 1475 to 1564. He is going to overlap with Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael. And so here we go. He goes back to making these Greek masterpieces, like the famous Discobolus, the symbol of Greece, and the giant, Poseidon, who is standing here with his arm outstretched, getting ready to throw his trident, which unfortunately has been lost. And there he got a picture of me, it looks like. Oh my God, what did he do? Oh, how did he get that photo? Selfie. In reality, it is the David. Here with the greatest student teacher I ever had, young David Niccolo there. And what we have in what is known as the Academia is one of his greatest works, known as the David. When Michelangelo was a young guy, took him years to create this. And when he was done, they said, my God, that's a beautiful sculpture. And he said, well, the sculpture was always there. I just chipped away the pieces. And the David is 26 feet tall, and what his representation is David right before the battle with Goliath. And if you look at it, his head and his hands are a little bit bigger in proportion than the rest of the statue, because what he was trying to convey was that what separates man from other animals is our ability to think, to form of a plan, to reason, and then act on it. So that is one of his more famous works. It is one of my favorites. The most famous is probably the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. It is part of the Vatican. It was the Pope's private chapel for many years. And Michelangelo actually hated the Pope. He thought he was corrupt. So he escaped, and the Pope sent soldiers to drag him back to paint this. And he painted it while hanging on a scaffold like 3 feet from the ceiling, painting in a fresco style, wet plaster that he would color, and then it would dry and form these brilliant lifelike paintings, and he would come out looking like a crazy man. And the exact center is right there, where it's called God Creating Adam, where the fingers are almost an inch apart. Just an incredible thing if you ever get a chance to go and see it. All right. Oh no, there we did it again. So what is awesome is my favorite is known as the Pieta, and it sits in St. Peter's Basilica, and it is Mary holding her son Jesus in her arms after he was taken down from the cross. And on her wrinkle of her robe, this is the only sculpture that Michelangelo ever signed. He put his signature on it because he thought he finally did something pretty good. In 1972, it was attacked by a mentally disturbed guy who broke off some of the fingers with a hammer. He was arrested. They were restored, and now it's surrounded by bulletproof glass. So anyway, but go see it. It is worthwhile. And I was right after that. Here is the Sistine Chapel. My favorite part, it's hard to tell here unless you find a picture of it, but down in the center, right here, there's like an angel holding skin. Very kind of modern art, weird. And Michelangelo says, when you die, all you leave behind is your skin, as your bones will eventually turn to dust. And it's him getting pulled up into heaven. But down here in the right-hand corner, going down into hell, you see a couple faces peering back with terror. One of them is the Pope, and the other one is one of the archbishops and cardinals that Michelangelo didn't like, so he kind of made them famous forever by putting them in his painting, as a lot of the Renaissance artists did. Now we have Raphael, who's my favorite Ninja Turtle in the cartoons. And Raphael, 1483 to 1520, will be a student of both Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. And he creates a famous painting we'll see in a second known as the School of Athens. And what the School of Athens was this kind of Hall of Fame portrait of all the great scholars in the past coming together in one area, from Socrates to Plato. And what they really enjoyed doing was, here is Socrates talking to Raphael, and down here is Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. So these guys were famous for putting each other into their paintings. And the School of Athens, along with the Marriage of the Virgin, here's a little bit better, bigger, brighter picture of the School of Athens, is going to be known as the Marriage of the Virgin. And what the School of Athens and what this does is it begins to show us perspective, where you have a flat painting, but here, like a parabola, like train tracks, you have this building with a small rectangle of light. It is a doorway. And you focus on that, and coming straight out from it are these lines like a train track. And as things move forward, they appear larger. And while this is a flat painting, and you see the Marriage of the Virgin here again with the big guys being painted in it, it looks three-dimensional. There is depth to the painting. So, Birth of Venus. Last but not least, we have Leonardo, probably the most widely talented Ninja Turtle artist that there was, from an inventor to a writer to a painter. He was able to write his name forward and backwards with each hand at the same time. Kind of a weird skill. My wife can do it. She thinks it's cool. I clearly can't write with one hand, so what does it matter? And so he has a couple interesting things. They are the Mona Lisa. And the one on the right is an earlier one that some people think is a different, different person. And you can see in the back it has like mountains and lakes and rivers, and it's more clear, whereas more famous Mona Lisa is kind of blurred. But it uses the golden mean, the same thing the Aztecs and Mayas and the Greeks and the Egyptians used to make their pyramids, the golden ratio, where again we have that look of depth and feeling. And if you see the Mona Lisa today, it is very small from being cut out of frames, as it's been stolen over and over and over again through the years. Michelangelo was also an inventor, came up with many ideas like a tank, a submarine, a helicopter, all of these mechanical drawings. And he comes up with the idea of the Vitruvian Man, or the universal man, as he would take dead bodies and dissect them to learn how the muscles and the veins worked, so he could make things more realistic. And so he, more than anybody, will embody the idea of the Renaissance man. And here we go with the Vitruvian Man right here. So, there's his little airplane. He also makes siege engines, or catapults, that will become big to breach castles in the time of warfare. Now, while there are a great many male artists, we cannot leave out some women in the Renaissance, especially this interesting lady, Sofonisba and Singula. And she is interesting because in the very male-dominated patriarchal world of the Renaissance, she actually becomes the court painter of King Philip of Spain, who was one of the richest men in the world at the time. And it's believed that Sofonisba would paint the paintings, and her brother would go and sell them. And then one day the King of Spain visiting was like, hey, I'd like to get you to paint my painting. And he's like, well, it's actually my sister. And the king was so impressed, he hired her to be his court painter. So anyway, she becomes, along with a lady named Christine de Pizan, a French poet, who become outspoken women's rights activists in this very difficult, nasty time. Then we are going to have some writers. And in Florence at the time, we have a guy, I read his book every couple years, Niccolo Machiavelli. And Machiavelli was an advisor to the Medicis. And he was fired, and he turns to writing. He reigned in the short time when it was actually democratic. And one of his most famous works is a book known as The Prince. And it was a political guide that said, this is how a ruler should gain power. And when you have it, is it better to be feared, or is it better to be loved? And he said, sometimes it is necessary for a ruler to mislead his people to keep secrets from his enemies. And he said it is better for a ruler to be feared than loved. And so if you hear the term Machiavellian today, it means someone who is very mysterious and uses deceit and is kind of a spy and works his way around things to further their own objectives. He should not deviate from what is good, if that is possible, but sometimes a good ruler should know how to do evil if that is necessary. That means like violence. Sometimes if there's a major threat, you got to eliminate that threat. So eventually, Renaissance is going to move towards the north. And Renaissance literature, especially with, we have our man Machiavelli there, and we're going to hear about Baldassare, Castellone, and Sir Thomas More. These things are going to happen at the same time as the painters, all right? 1478 to the 1500s. The Prince will be written in 1513. But the Renaissance and painting is going to move northward. And we're going to get two brothers from Belgium, Jan and Hubert van Eyck. And there's a beautiful museum to them in the town of Bruges, Belgium, to this day. And since they lived in a more damp climate, the Low Countries, they invented an oil-based paint where they moved in oil or like fat from like cows and pigs, and they mixed it with colors. And when it dried, it was more vibrant. It wouldn't run like some of the watercolors that some of the Ninja Turtles used because they were in the damp Belgium. And what they will do is they will paint scenes of modern day life like peasants, and then they will put them into different stories. Like here are peasants dressed in the modern day, walking with Jesus out to crucifixion. And they show pictures of like farm work and city life. So they're like frescoes for the time. Northern Renaissance literature, we're going to get this guy named Baldassare Castellone, which, oh, by the way, as I was going to say, the paints that you will probably use modern day to paint houses and doors and outside are oil-based, thanks to the Van Eycks. Baldassare Castellone, this guy here, if any of you went to the Cotillon, he wrote the book on proper manners, how to behave, how to act, even like what spoon and fork and cup you use. You know, cups and drinks are to the left, you use the utensils outside in. As an old dishwasher, not a super huge fan of Baldassare Castellone, because I only need one fork, one spoon, and one knife, but his book of etiquette makes that a little bit different. Then we have Sir Thomas More and his Utopia. Named for the Catholic Church in town, is named after him. And he writes a book in 1516 That was his vision of the perfect or utopian world. And while he wrote it, he had to very subtly criticize his king and best friend for corruption and the way things were going inside of England at the time. And in Sir Thomas More's Utopia, everyone would work, learn, and there would be peace and harmony. There would be no social class separation, and everything would run correctly and smoothly, but he had to disguise his true meaning in a very satirical fashion as he was making fun of his good buddy and the king. All right, we already talked about Dante writing the Inferno on the steps of Santa Maria de Croce in Florence. And here's another one of Jan van Eyck's paintings called the Arnolfi Marriage, which is kind of weird and modern. Here you have a man and woman getting married, and if you look in the background, it is not their backs, but kind of their faces. And he had to hold this mirror up while painting it, and he is coming up with the famous saying, "I probably should have started with the man in the mirror." Like self-reflection. Think about what you are doing before you are doing it. What kind of person are you? And should you be inspiring or interacting with teaching others? Think before you act. Some weird modern interpretation there. All right. At the same time, we have William Shakespeare. I know you guys have read some of his plays. Good old Bill, 1564 to 1616. He is going to write 37 plays. And he is going to add nearly 15 to 700 words in the English language. And his plays show the range of emotion, from jealousy to love to acquiring power, and how the strong can be brought down by their weaknesses. And Shakespeare's plays and the characters and the emotions displayed are so endearing because he shows that even the rich and famous and the powerful are just normal people, man. They got to put their pants on the same way we do, one leg at a time. My favorite book, and one of them, and what they say is the most read book outside of the Bible, is Miguel Cervantes' Don Quixote. And it tells the story of how the Middle Age is changing. It's a satire on how the world, as we move into the Renaissance, is closing the door to the past. Don Quixote is an old medieval knight who was longing for the days of old when he was powerful and important and saved damsels in distress. And so he goes on this journey with his little assistant Sancho Panza, and he, attacks windmills if they were dragons and does all of these other embarrassing things. And what you get is that it's his squire, Sancho Panza, who is overlooked, who is the new model of society. Sancho is a Renaissance man, a leader who's practical, who's logical, who is good at many different talents. But as he was a peasant, he was often overlooked. I compare him to Samwise Gamgee in The Lord of the Rings. Frodo is the big hero and Aragorn gets all the claim. But who was the loyal, behind-the-scenes, dedicated, I'm going to help. I can't carry the ring, Mr. Frodo, but I can carry you. It's Samwise Gamgee, like Sancho Panza. And what cannot be overstated is the effect of the printing press developed by Johann Gutenberg. Just a complete game changer. If you ever ride the golf ball ride at the Epcot Center, both Michelangelo, painting the Sistine Chapel, and Gutenberg's printing press are back to back. And it's a ride about world history. That's how important they are. Now, China and the Tang and Song dynasties had the movable, wooden block printing press, but you had to shake and move the letters all the time. Well, in 1456, a German guy, Johann Gutenberg, creates a faster version of this. And it used paper, not parchment. So you could print things more cheaply and a lot faster. And he will print the Christian Bible. And with it, widespread changes come. printing becomes cheap, it becomes easy. And now people have access to written material, and they're encouraged, more and more people, to learn to read messages, pronouncements. Everything can be printed. And it was told people to question the world around them, which will facilitate another big change in world history, and that is Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. Now, in the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church, we know, had tremendous power. And then during the days of the Black Plague, it really began to have trouble. There was corruption in the post-Renaissance or Middle Age world and during the Black Plague. And so, as many popes and bishops were living like wealthy kings, people began to get angry. And one of these guys was a Catholic monk, Martin Luther. And when he went to his hometown, he saw church officials selling a thing known as an indulgence. What it was is that you could pay for sins that you haven't committed yet. I'm going to pay you, priest, to absolve me from my sins, to say a prayer for me. So it was like a debit card for like sinning. Or people were being charged so that their dead relatives could make it to heaven. They could escape purgatory, kind of like this made-up thing where you're a waiting room to get into heaven. Upon seeing this, Martin Luther did, which was customary of the day. He went down to the local cathedral and he nailed his 95 theses, or 95 problems about abuses in the church. This is what you were supposed to do. But because he shined a light on a glaring problem, he was declared an outlaw by the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. So this will lead us to a little thing Germany is going to fall into instability. And so eventually the Holy Roman Emperor will be forced to sign what is known as the Peace of Augsburg in 1555. And what it did was it allowed each German prince in the region to choose which religion he was going to follow, Catholicism or Protestantism. And we'll get more into that later. During this push to clean up the church, we have a couple other things. John Calvin is going to build upon Luther's foundation, where Calvin will claim that the Bible is the only source of truth. God is an all-powerful, just entity, and man was a sinful creature by nature. And Calvin came up with the idea of predestination. What you are going to do is already determined. God has already chosen who's going to make it to heaven and who's going to go to hell before you were born. So Calvin set up communities, mostly around Geneva, Switzerland, that followed the old Benedictine ideals of hard work, honesty, discipline, to focus on religion, and hopefully you could earn your way into heaven. At the same time, King Henry VIII of England wanted to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Problem is, Catherine was the wife of the Holy Roman Emperor, the King of Spain, King Charles, and it was the Pope's best friend. So the Pope says no. This angers Henry VIII, and he had a loyal archbishop annul his marriage, and King Henry formed the Anglican Church with him as its head, not the Pope. If you went to an English Anglican church service and went to a Roman Catholic church service, you go up to Benedict's up on Weaver Dairy Road, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference if you went to St. Thomas More. The idea is that the Pope is not in charge, but rather the head royal of England. And if you go to England today, good luck finding a Catholic church. Prince Charles got into a little bit of trouble a few years ago when he went to attend a wedding of one of his buddies. And this will kick off the scientific revolution, where we have great achievements in science. And this is creativity and achievement is just one side effect of how the Reformation against the church led to its losing its power, its stranglehold on education. People wanted to be educated, so they began to study the physical world, and the church could no longer force its own thoughts on its people. So we are going to have a guy named Nicholas Copernicus, and he restated the heliocentric theory of the universe, something that we know Aristarchus knew about in ancient Greece. And Copernicus said that the Earth and other planets revolve around the sun, not the other way around. Well, this caused a big problem for the church because they were saying opposite to what he was saying. It was different than what the church taught. So if Copernicus proved that the church was wrong, it could lead to a lot of unwanted questions. So this brings in Johann Kepler and a guy named Galileo Galilei. And they were inspired by not only Copernicus, but another guy named Tycho Brahe, who builds a telescope. And Brahe charts the movements of the planets, and he makes a chart, and he actually proves that Copernicus was correct. Well, Kepler and Galileo will chart the orbits of the planets and moons with powerful telescopes. And they will claim that the planets will move and rotate. And they said the Earth also rotates once every 24 hours. The church was so upset that Galileo was persecuted and condemned. And he was dragged into an inquisition that said that they were going to excommunicate him unless he publicly stated that he was incorrect. So apparently, as legend has it, Galileo said, "Yes, I am wrong." But as he turned and left the Inquisition, he whispers, "Yes, it does move. We are correct." And the people of Florence erected a tomb for Galileo, and the tomb is decorated with the sun and the earth and the known planets at the time rotating. Well, inspired by Galileo, Isaac Newton, we all know famously, was studying at the University of Cambridge. And Newton will live 1643 to 1727, when he was pondering deep thoughts of the universe and math and other smart people stuff, when all of a sudden an apple lands on his head. And this legendarily inspires Newton to use mathematics to come up with the theory of gravity. All you mathletes will know how to draw that algorithm, logarithm, whatever rhythm. And Newton, using math, proved that planets do move. It was on the basis of mathematical principles, not natural philosophy, that would govern the laws of science. He said all motion can be studied and measured with mathematics, which we will later use to go into outer space and do other things. See the movie Hidden Figures or First Man and you'll figure it out. And then last but not least, we have my man Francis Bacon. Everything tastes a little better with bacon on it, and Francis proved it by coming up with his 5-step scientific method, the thing that you guys use in science class to this very day. And what he said was that Aristotle was wrong in his thoughts about the governance of the physical world. He said the answer to the question can only be arrived at after a long period of study, where you have to go through a series of steps. You got to form your hypothesis, you got to conduct an experiment, you got to record your observations and findings, run the experiment again until you come up with the same conclusion. And if you screw up, you record what you did right, where you did wrong, and you go back to the beginning. So anyway, that, guys, is the Renaissance as fast as we can do it. I hope you enjoy it. I'll do the Explorers sometime this week. All right.